nhớ rằng ý trong bao nhiêu mà chua cho lên cho từ đó là của nhà hóa nè cả trong xe trả tàu tuần chỉ này được số hóa sự cho nó nếu nó của nhà là những tuần chua rồi nữa ra đã nâng lưng thương bán té và tới kia xe tên này sẽ đầu giờ mỗi lúc xe hở là còn kia là nó của tiếp liền. Dong Seng dropped the axe to the ground and began picking up the chopped wood in his arms. The sun was beginning to fade as he hurried to the shed and dropped an armful on the ground. As he returned for the second round, Kyochia appeared at the edge of the woods and began walking toward him. Once he collected another armful, he looked up as she picked up the axe on the ground. He dropped the woods and stumbled backward. "Ntxhi Laim," he whispered. "Ntxhi Laim," she asked. "Ni chẳng muốn số con giờ. Cho cả tao nữ tôn trí của tao lúc vào mong rong. Cho cả tao nữ tôn trí của tao ta sư nè. Chỉ liên tới kèm hoa nọ cũng mất lúc khi có gia kia." Muộn xí lại, Dong Seng said as he entered the crown prince's chamber to find her cleaning. She was wearing a peach-colored gown with a smile on her pretty face. "Nữ Dong Seng, mà đã chị?" "Trên đây hình lợ, cô chỉ tao một giải có mong tao lúc vào hồ rong nọ. Cô nông hai tia có bốn đợt của mụ." Her eyes lit up. "Của mụ cơ?" "Dạ lên đó, con bài ít ta sư nó ở nhà mụ." The temple was situated on a hilltop facing the mountain with two large dragon statues in the front. Upon seeing it, Ntxhi Laim was deeply impressed and felt a strong, positive vibe fill her. As the carriage came to a stop, Dong Seng helped her out, and as she began walking up the path, she heard him call out to her. "Cô chỉ nhắc anh gặp bác sư tôi rồi cho hậu sản nào lợ. Có muốn vấn đề của trong một cá trò của mà đi trả tôi." "Ô lên đó." She watched the carriage disappear down the road, and she quickly walked up to the entrance. The door was closed, and she knocked, but no one answered. She pushed, and it creaked open, giving a soft moan as if in pain. She entered and found a fountain surrounded by white tiger lilies. Her face lit up with love as she moved along the path and found the entrance to one of the praying rooms. She removed her shoes and walked in to find it was deadly silent. Normally, the monks would be praying and servants would be cleaning around the area. "But she called out. She heard the sound of a chanting from behind her, and she quickly ran out to catch what looked like a woman's train dress disappearing into the prayer house across. She ran out and entered the other entrance to find it was dark, and that was when the door behind her slammed shut. She heard the sound of a match, and then light filled the room from a candle. She recognized Kyochia's face as the flame flickered across her. "Kyochia! Yokosha!" She smiled. "Cái xả tế cái lần tên nọ. Cứ tức xả tế cân chế cân gò nọ ô chát sao thổ cơ chẳng phóng được của tế thế à." Ntxhi Laim ran to push the door open, but it didn't budge. She heard the woman laughing, and then turned around to find what looked like the shimmer of a dagger in her hand. "Tế cả tí nâng mà chỉ nghe là chân taoอยู่lúc mới mỏ kia lì. Nếu nọ, cơ mỏ ít cái đi sư. Giờ chỉ cái đi của chị giờ là tôi ngại cái lúc chị tôi cho một phẩu," she said. "Cơ sát xả tế cái tổ tao của ta chỉ xả lúc có. Giờ cái chẳng ôn lý giả đó của thế kẻ này chú có một ta có tính nâng." Kyochia screamed and threw a bowl at her and missed by a hair. It crashed into the corner of the dark room. "Chị bố! Cái lúc hắn dạo, lưng tên trò chạy cái chân của tôi." She laughed, and then she said, Cái này kia sư nà, cái này kia sư tôi chỉ xả yếu con à." Ntxhi Laim's eyes widened. "Cô nè, cái bao cô nè đi cả." She pulled out a small bottle and set it on the table. "Cái này khai tao tao giả được cô hẹn. Nếu nọ, giờ có qua tiếng rong oli của hải, có chẳng những một some hồng chỉ xả ở rồi cơ thia." "Cái xả tao đã chi nào?" She picked up the bottle. How? How 这种给估计多高？ Có đại tận cái ở nhỏ rong con mỹ chỉ. Giờ có tự đâu cú yêu ô cả tín hình để tên trai thế chính có luôn chơi mua. Có ý chúng mà cái đi kia. She began walking toward her with a smile on her face. Có sao vậy thì có giờ tao là nhỏ của cả chờ. Chỉ xa ya cú tu. Cú chứ chỉ bù lên từ chân tao. How? Ntxhi Laim felt the blade of the dagger on her chin as Kyochia smiled with victory. Now she knew why her father had died so soon and so suddenly. This was going to be her one chance to bring her stepmother into the light. Ntxhi Laim said as she shoved the woman aside. The blade entered her shoulder and she knocked the bottle out of Kyochia's hands. It shattered into pieces as the woman screamed and tried to stab her again. Ntxhi Laim caught her hand as the dagger came deadly close to her cheek. She slashed the dagger across Ntxhi Laim's chest, and the warm blood filled her gown. With an angry war cry, Ntxhi Laim tackled the woman down and shoved her head against the ground. She brought up the dagger, and this time Ntxhi Laim knocked it out of her hand. It scattered to the corner, and she slapped Kyochia across the face. But the woman used her elbow to knock her across the cheek, causing her to lose her balance. Ntxhi Laim hurried to grab the knife and picked up the handle just as Kyochia grabbed a handful of her hair. The pain from her scalp made her drop the knife as she threw her head back and connected to the woman's lips. She heard a crack and felt pain shoot through her head. When she turned around, Kyochia was bleeding from her lips. The horse's neighing brought attention to the servants who opened the drawbridge. Jisa was riding in the front with his brother and Tieying. The victory flag was flying in the air as he felt the heat of the sun exhaust him. The past few days had been tiring, and he longed to find her sweet face in the crowd. As he neared the entrance of the manor, he saw Dong Seng running out to meet him. The look on his face told him something was wrong. "Yo, he asked. Hearing her name made his heart skip beats. Before his brother could stop him, Jisa turned his horse around and began riding toward the abandoned monastery. His heart was pounding as he hoped that he would find her still alive. He pushed his horse faster even though he knew the animal had suffered enough for the past few days. It took him half an hour before he reached the temple, and as he got off the horse, sure enough, activity had taken place because the door was ajar. He entered and removed his sword as he slowly kept his eyes focused for movement. One of the doors was wide open, and he hurried inside to find Kyochia on the ground, a dagger in her chest, and the woman bleeding profusely. He bent down and she was gasping for her last breath. "Jisa," she said through a low whisper, "Pakapaku." He asked. She shuddered and moaned gently from pain. Guchipao. She gasped a few deep breaths, and then her eyes shuttered close. He picked her up and shook her lightly, but she remained still. He dropped her body on the ground and walked out to find a trail of blood on the doorsteps. Where could she have gone? He followed the trail of blood, but it disappeared into the forest. He picked up his pace and began running, knowing she must be injured. Thunder roared above the sky as rain began falling in sheets, it seemed, as Tieying stood in the front of the manor waiting. Jisa had disappeared for half a day now, and no return was in sight. Dong Seng confessed and was given 20 lashes as he lay in the dungeon below. The thunder roared again, and this time when lightning flashed, Tieying saw Jisa riding toward the manor with Ntxhi Laim in his arms, bloody and unconscious. He shouted her name and rushed out to them as Jisa got off the horse. He brought her to his chamber and began shouting for servants to get medical doctors in as he swiftly removed his armor. Ntxhi Laim had suffered many deep knife wounds as Jisa turned to him and glared. "Tao Mu," he said. "Tao Mu, Guchi Mu Hao Te, Ti Ko Te Li Zhong Li Na, giờ có sao mà cho chiến thằng này có ý sai chỉ trong nó kia ta chỉ nó chỉ lúc kia có yêu là tự trả cô lúc yêu hai ta cái chỉ li ta chỉ nó có chừng là ốp được cũng sẽ nó thế kệ có giờ mà年大挑个本个事就钱呢กู都讲那叫你录节目中的日子了Ntev应是个噻知道กู只不过把你录节中的呢 Smiling, Jisa replied, 个保证所以能自来录节กู已保单套了Ntev was shocked as the doctor came in and he was shoved outside the chamber. Ntxhi Laim woke to the smell of a citrus oil burning and her throat was sore. She lightly coughed and pain shot through her body. A hand tightened hers and she found Jisa looking at her. She was confused as she frowned and washed as he removed his hand to get her some water. "Bamaka he asked. She took the water he gave her and shook her head. "Ying ma da shi gu utao. Gusa de ga mo touch tao dalana." Smiling, he replied, "Nu kun te to ka ye nu ku dala tsache." She pa ka lun je mo lun si ta ko, o ru ku lu shenya chika. Tong sang tu leng so ya ta la. Jong ka kun te to ka. She remembered now how they had fought over the dagger, and when they fell together, it had ended up in Gyochia's chest. After that, she tried to walk, but lost conscience from losing so much blood. She shut her eyes and felt exhausted. The woman had almost succeeded in killing her, and if Jisa hadn't come in time, she would have been dead. He reached for her and pulled her into his arms. "Kuchbuka to jinzila. Kunyarondana. Chagasakin jingdagu." His embrace made her exhale, and she let out a sob, emptying her tears into his arms. She felt his lips against her head, and the fear she had of earlier, when she was struggling with Gyochia, wondering if she would end up losing her life, flashed in her mind. "Kapapao, ta ku chen Gyochia, chen ni kya la jong ni yo za da ku za she de dia. Kun chai heng. Ku sa ten che rong na, ku yo to kai mon di mu. Ku yo o jan che to za ken ya jeng da ku chi," she cried. He gently pushed her back and wiped her eyes. "Ku kya lu. Ku chi bu ka to ta meng ni na i ran zi la." Smiling, she added, "Ke pa sa pa ka kun chan zi ya ra chi thia?" He cocked his head and asked, "Ya ra chi?" She reached for his hand and he gave it. "Kun chai cha ku chi ta pa ka im ho do. Ku sa tia yin ya ka chen ku la te shi. Ka yin zi chi bu lu de wo pe de ku. Kan da na khai to hai tia ka yin pa ka ta ku di cho ya. Ta shi ta ku ye jie ye ton da kun chai cha thau ka ta la. Ku chi yan da ta ka lun si. Ku sa te yi hai tia. Xia ka ye rong xia la xia ka ye qi xia." He pulled her into his arms. "Ke ba sa pa? Thau ku ta la za. Ku sa do cho za ge. Chi ba ka. Lu xia ten jong ta. Thau ku ba tong sang kia la ku yi bao hai te mo te ya chi rong chi shi la." "Nxhi Laim, ku tha zi o ku la kan ka te li to chi li na. Ku tha zi." She pushed herself away and looked up at him. "Hai zan de tong sang, ni o li kia la. Ni to chi la. Ku ma li o ti rong nong nu shen ye o li kia tia." "En de kyo chen ne. Ku de ka ya tu zi kia ni lu ge mu dong ni ne ni zi la. Te meng ye sa san da nu mu tan tha la. Kun zheng hai te ni zi yin ji o ta meng ka tu." She took his hands. "Kun cha cha ka zi ge ku." He laughed and replied, "Kun zheng hai te ye ku zi dong ji ka. Ku zi yo nye ka heng." The light in the court hall had dimmed as the king sat reading a scroll and eating a plate of dates. A servant was fanning him, and one was pouring tea in his cup. Jisa walked in, and the servants bowed, moving away to the side. "Guling zi hua tai gu ta ka lu shi ho," he said. "Tao ke. Mo ra ji. Gu zi. Gu sai to gu pa gu she le." This got the king's attention, and Jisa watched as his father set the scroll down and sat up, perked at the words he had announced. He waved his hand, and everyone in the court left them. "Khai lo, ni ya lang ti tun sai. Ya lo zi hai tun sai hu an si lai." The king paused, and then he said, "Ni lo mong tu tu za kun jai. Tao tu ka hong ji tao ni tun sai no." How should Jisa explain this? He was about to answer when Ntxhi Laim entered the court and replied, "Chỉ hoa tại ra công, chỉ sa chẳng lòng được cuốn tù." His father's eyes widened. "Có chẳng lo bao lo sẽ lo? Chỉ tao ya lo bao lo sẽ cũng ban đề, cũng su tao cũng sẽ." "Chỉ sa," his father said as he stood up. "Ý chữ của những khó khăn có hại tiền lo lý bao lo lý sẽ có chỉ những một chữ. Ya vì lý जानू nó cũng tự chỉ họ nó tệ chữ chẳng ni nó." Chỉ sa dropped to his knees. "Cũng chỉ, họ chẳng ya tiền cũng chờ nữa. Ya, cũng những chẳng lo,แต่是cũng tháo cầm lòng cũng hãy lo." "Hay lo, chỉ hoa tại, cái những hại tiền thiệt bọn thiệt sẽ yêu chủ sai tu cả lần đó cũng lúc tao bị sinh hoa hử. Cũng thiệt thông luôn tu nó những chỉ mỗi thứ rong lì. Ta chỉ thầu cũng một bỏ thêm起来，cũng những chân tao hại tiền ni ya tu nhớ là我都sao hử nó đó cũng." His father nodded. "Tu chỉ, một cho nữa lần chỉ cũng sao." Ntxhi Laim dropped to his knees. "Chỉ hoa tại, tu sự tao chỉ lại ya cũng. Cũng chỉ tháo ra chuyện đó con tao, cũng tháo cái món chỉ lại sát tệ đó cũng sự." The king laughed and he sat back down. "Cũng chim long tê lù kín đó nếu tu chỉ nên có, cũng tháo long tuần sai cái lù sự." The door opened and Silai walked in with a maid holding her from her injuries. She was going to kneel, but the king put his hand up. Tao le, long da na, he ordered. "Lo của yếm lù nông con." She walked up to where he was and bowed as much as she could. "Chỉ hoa tai, có lù lá chín cô?" "Có ya chơ hai tuần sai lo?" he asked. Jisa saw the shocked look in her eyes, and she turned around to gaze at him. He gave her a slight nod of his head. She nodded quickly and looked away. "Rong, cú có lon hú nó, vì cú sẵn nông có ý lo lù." "Có nó đã chỉ hoa tai." "Cú nông hai tia, có xá lý cả chẳng được tin nâng plua." This was the question his father always asked of the women who had showed interest in his sons. It was a test, and the ones who got to call themselves his brother's wives had passed this test. Obviously, Ntxhi didn't, but he trusted that Ntxhi Laim would. "Chỉ hoa tai, tin nâng plua, thế tin nâng mua, rong ý ảnh cầu. Vì hậu sát cá tê, ya mất phua lò tí có xỉ liếp lông. Nhờ từ mua cho hử từ plua, để luôn tu ya cho cá thế ya cho chán tu." "Perfect," Jisa thought. As he smiled, he saw the glimmer of appreciation in his father's eyes. And then his father leaned forward. "Có xá lý cả cho cụ tu." Jisa tightened his hands into fists. He hoped he would hear a good answer from her. She turned to look at Ntxhi Laim, and then her eyes fell onto his before returning the gaze to his father. "Chỉ hoa tai có tu cha lý hành. Sợ rào ya Npab tu cụ tê hậu lúc có tua lò. Cụ chua nâng gây tao hành. Cụ bao cho kế có thể có những nâng gây con." "Thảo khai cụ chỉ hoa tai." She smiled. "Cứ mua tệ lỡ nữ tìm ta ra sẽ kể cụ chỉ số nâng gây đó có thể lỡ." Jisa watched as her eyes turned misty, as if she was getting ready to cry. He could feel Ntxhi Laim's energy beside him as the man tried to control his anger. "Chỉ hoa tai," Ntxhi Laim said, "cụ tháo chua có ý lo lù." "Chỉ ta chua," his father said, "cụ yuan chỉ lại cái lù sự." Jisa watched with a wickedly rapid beating heart as she stared at the king, and then her eyes shifted to his. The lips he'd come to kiss and love, the body she had given to him, and the voice that soothed his soul. She suddenly smiled, and then she turned to his father. "Chỉ hoa tai, cụ lệnh wa chỉ sa tu ta ra." "Ở cháu ở nơi đời chẳng tí lo còn cụ thế, tôn cầu với tờ sát đến đây nọ. Cụ bà thấy kia xưa tại nơi đời chỉ sẽ kể nó có nhớ giống, bé mà lấy sinh chi đồ à."